in India. And if that's what God is, if that's on the heart of God, then those that position themselves with the heart of God will automatically be successful. We're not to ask God to bless what we're doing. We're to ask God that we could do what He's blessing. And so when we find out what God has purpose to bless, and we get involved in it, all we have to do is show up with clean heart and clean hands. Ta-da! You don't have to be talented. You don't have to have special resources of yourself. If you know what God is doing and you show up and you get involved and you participate and you just go, God, here I am. You are guaranteed absolute success. Because God is going to use someone in this hour to turn this world right side up for His name's sake. And you have to see yourself. You say, I know pastor's anointed. I know that staff is anointed. But you've got to see yourself as anointed. You've got to understand that this isn't just for a select few. This is, again, I say, for whosoever will. Jesus is in the empowering, anointing, enabling business. Now then, somebody wants to know, it's a good question, how do you get anointing? Brother Stone King uses a simple definition. He says anointing is God's favor. Well, of course, that's true. But can I take a step further? Hebrews 1:9 gives us some insight. In Hebrews, the writer is quoting Psalm 45, a psalm of prophecy about Jesus, about the Messiah. And he's quoting from this psalm in Hebrews, and he says, "Thou hast loved righteousness and hated iniquity." Talking about Jesus. Talking about the anointed one. And says, here is the character of the Messiah. He loves what's right, and he hates what's wrong. You say, can it be that simple? It says, therefore, or because of this, even thy God hath anointed thee with the oil of gladness above thy fellows. In other words, no one has ever been anointed like Jesus was anointed. There is not an anointing that is superior to his anointing. You know why? Because he had a perfect hatred for unrighteousness and a perfect love for righteousness. So here's what I need to tell you. The more like Jesus you become in your love of righteousness and your hatred of sin, the greater your anointing. There is I don't have time to explain this, but there is a righteous factor that is upon this congregation. It flows from Clyde Haney's life to Kenneth Haney's life to Nathaniel Haney's life. Because when there are generations of people that have it in their spirit that they love righteousness, but it's not just enough to love the good stuff. You've got to have a hatred for the evils of this world. And because of that, there is a righteous factor upon this congregation that you can, through this righteous factor, you can impact this entire West Coast, and you can and shall be that gateway to Asia. You say, well, what if I'm not from a family, a third generation family? No problem. My daddy wasn't from one either. I don't know how far back it went, but I know that four generations, my grandfathers before my dad were alcoholics. And I am telling you that you can change. You can start a righteous factor in your family at any point, at any time that you make up your mind. Because my daddy told me, he said, son, alcoholism ruined my family. My mom and dad was divorced when I was a baby. He said, but I determined there's no way you can be an alcoholic if you never touch the first drop. He said, so I never tasted the stuff, boy, and I'm hoping that's the decision you made. I made that decision. I passed it on to my son, Barrick. I don't know how many generations there were alcoholics, but I know that there's now 3 generations that have never touched the stuff, that have been set free from the power of God. And I have started in my family a righteous factor of deliverance from God, by His power, by His grace, and by His mercy. Anointing is the favor of God that comes from you loving what is right and hating what is wrong. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time horseback. And I loved riding. I loved every aspect. I loved the smell of the hay in the barn. I loved the smell in the tack room of the equipment, the bridles and the saddles, and even the sweaty old horse blankets. But what made riding especially fun was if you had a good saddle. And I learned early on how important it was to take care of your equipment. And I was taught to use the saddle soap, the saddle oil. And it has multiple purposes. You see, when you read about anointing, we like the anointing. And when we read about the anointing, I see the mental picture of Samuel uncorking the horn and he's pouring the oil and it's just runs onto David's head. Or Aaron, it run down his head. But when I looked up the word anointing here, you don't have to be a Greek or a Hebrew scholar. You just have to have a computer that you can click. So I clicked on that word. And I got a different mental picture. Brother Andrew, would you come here? Yeah, you can stand right here. Just stand right there. Couldn't happen to a better young man. Because they didn't just pour the oil on. When you click on the word anointing there, it means to apply the oil, but it meant to rub it in. So when they poured the oil on, apparently they massaged it right in. Now the reason why they were doing that, it's good as new, I promise. Well, almost, okay. The reason why you put the oil on the saddle, 2 purposes. to keep it soft and pliable. Because if you don't, it'll get dry and it'll crack